name is Catherine Harrison. Welcome to The Power of Five. This is a series that brings 5 behavior change specialists from around the globe to discuss topics related to leadership and then whatever else tickles our fancy that day. Today, I am thrilled to welcome our guest and my friend Brett Halliday to join our discussion on leadership. And by way of introduction, I would actually like to read a little blurb because he has a vast and varied background and I think brings a lot of perspective and experience to our conversation today. For the past 27 years, Brett played a key role in helping Michael Hill Jewelers grow from a small family business in New Zealand to now dominating the New Zealand, Australian, and Canadian jewelry retail industry. Brett moved his family to Canada in 2007, that's when I met him, to spearhead the Canadian expansion, and over 13 years at the helm, built the business from scratch to 86 stores from coast to coast. Starting his career in the Royal Australian Navy, he relates a lot of his leadership learnings and qualities to time spent at sea working within a tight-knit team in high-pressure situations. Brett's passion and excitement for talent development led him to develop an internal training academy, which was recognized by the Retail Council of Canada and won the coveted award for talent development. Highly visible leader, excels at building capable, committed teams with a clear focus on current and future state business performance. I did want to just give my colleagues a quick summary of the conversation we had a few days ago in preparation for today. I had asked Brett, hey, it's open season, what would you like to talk about? And we started talking about the fact that in many organizations, there is the desire and in fact a practice to move people up and through the organization into leadership roles. And although it's talked a good game, there really isn't deep and broad, thorough and well-supported leadership development within the organizations that actually supports these people to come to their fullest leadership self. And they often then don't flourish. They often fail either within the organization or leave the organization far too soon before any of that investment is realized. So that's a loose topic for today. And so, Brett, I guess my question for you to just kick us off this evening is, what specific experience or observation led you to conclude that this is kind of a I was going to use the word pandemic, but perhaps I shouldn't. But this is kind of it is a common gap, really, in terms of actually putting in the resources, the time, the effort, and the support to develop next generation leaders with organizations.
I spent some time after our discussion here. I did spend some time, and I think the message that I wanted to share was like the succession of our future leaders and the transferring of knowledge and skills and the behaviors to allow them to succeed at the next level. And too many of our current CEOs, leadership teams, and executives actually don't equip the future leaders to succeed at that level. And ultimately, what I see a lot is people leaving organizations in search of what they believe they want, or they search things, and there's far too many of them end up bouncing around from organization to organization, when in fact, if there was far greater or better internal processes and performance indicators and systems and practices, these people would flourish. And just to back that up, I recently did a survey, and over 57% of the people, and this is predominantly retail, but I'm sure it flows into other industries, 57% of the people that I surveyed placed career development on a higher scale than they did stability or pay or salary. So to them, and these are our future leaders. So I looked back and I thought I'd try and narrow it down to 4 key points that I personally had experienced in my career. And I suppose I was one of the fortunate few that started on the sales floor as a trainee manager and ended up as the president of the organization with one organization, which is obviously quite rare, but I feel quite privileged to have been able to transfer and move through the organization. And when I look back, and what I would say to our CEOs or executives, there's 4 points that I would give them, and I would recommend that they make in their organizations. And those are that there needs to be a fully dedicated, a dedicated and fully transparent program as a leadership program, which there isn't. And unfortunately, people in organizations offer, well, why did that person get the role, or what do I need to do, or how come they got it and my results are better? And so the transparency isn't there. There's lots of KPIs and measurements, but usually they are specific to a role, but not to a leadership, or they're not measured. The second point would be, it has to be either fully or partially, mainly partially, facilitated by an external partner. Just to have an in-house program run by the people that were put into the previous role and them trying to develop the next one because they never got trained. They have to bring external leaders in, or external facilitators, external experts, and allow these people access to external. And another key point in my survey that I did to back that up was 82% of the managers and regional managers in retail organizations I surveyed either only once a year or never experience outside external speakers or guests brought into the organization. And that to me is like mind blowing. It's a tragedy.
Yeah.
So that's 2 points. The third point I would make, that the program has to be measured, and not by performance metrics, but by good, robust people metrics, e.g., 360 surveys, culture surveys. We often had every 2 to 3 years culture surveys, which were measured by country level, by region level, right down, and really, they were fantastic. And they also, whilst most people will say, oh, you don't learn anything from them, it usually always correlated to the performance of those individual business units as well. And I was proud to say that, like Canada always on our culture, people culture, always scored highly, and it was reflective in our growth results. And the last point that I would make, and this just comes from my own experience, is that the internal leadership program has to, the participants have to have exposure, and there has to be weaved into the program exposure to key executives or the board or the higher level. And the example was when I was a young regional manager, I got sent to Western Australia to open the Western Australian division. And as soon as I went out there, the CEO brought me into, and he put me on the advertising committee. I didn't know anything about that, but once a month, I used to fly back to Brisbane to head office to sit on the advertising committee at the executive level. Now, I was a representative of retail, so I could share my thoughts, but what it did, it actually exposed me to meetings with the board and the CEO and understand strategy instead of just being in the field left to my own devices. And that was probably, I must say, one of the turning points or the biggest influencing moments that I had, where I actually got to interact with executives that were sort of, 2 layers above me, and actually start to learn the inner workings. And that really propelled my success, and hence my expansion into Canada. So any CEO or executive leaders out there, if you can take those 4 points and weave them into a leadership program for your future leaders, I can guarantee you that they'll stick around. You'll be far more successful. You'll have a far better workplace, and also in that survey, what got me thinking about this was that 65% of the retail, or the survey of the retail managers and regionals and future leaders that I surveyed, 65% said that they would relocate for future roles. So the people are in your organizations, they value career development, they will move to, and they want to stay with you, but unfortunately, our executives and CEOs aren't providing them with the programs, and so they're leaving organizations. And to me, that's it's a real tragedy, and something that I'm very, very passionate about.
Yeah, and your point around, hey, I spent 27 years in retail. I can rest assured that issue, or those issues, or the gaps exist in cross sector. We see this. I see this many times with clients where people, key talent, are moved around very quickly, and not really given, certainly not given bits and pieces of those four critical success factors you articulated, but access to external support, whether it be coaching support or that shadow opportunity with senior executives on different kinds of functional committees, or just the almost like a blank slate to say, hey, here's a development pool of money or resources or funds. You choose what you'd like to develop in this new role, or for the steps that you want to go to in the next two steps. So I do think it is a very widespread issue. I'd love to just get any of the other folks to ask Brett to expand or to weigh in or share your thoughts on what he's brought to the table so far.
I just want to say this, Brett, as an external person that works on leadership, I want to hug you for what you just said.
Me too. Music to our ears.
Like music, and I will be sharing this episode, trust me. But one quick comment, and then one question as well. I think the importance of having external people is really, and I'm not just saying that because we're external people, but often when we only get exposed to the people that we see every day, or even with the people that work in the same industry, we don't see the blind spots. And we love cross-pollinating with different industries. So I love that. And then the question I had was, your number one point was develop a good leadership program. I'm just curious, what would make, in your mind, what makes a good leadership program?
I think not sending someone on a training program, or sending them to a university, or sending them to a college, or it's not about the theory. It's about having them exposed to people that are doing the role, have done the role, and then assigning them to that person. Now, sure, you'll need a framework, and there needs to be, what do you want to get out of it? How long is it going to? There needs to be metrics in there, so there has to be some type of success measured, which I would always relate back to either some type of people measurement. And that's where I said it's important to make sure that they've done a 360 before they start, speak to their teams after they start, use those types of functions, not just performance on the job, either sales or profit or whatever, because that will come with it. That's just the results of the outcome of them being better leaders. But also, what makes it a good program? I've never seen the perfect program. And trust me, we've tried to build multiple, and we've screwed it up plenty of times, right? But at least we had things in place. Whether they were right, at least we had something that we were doing. And so there has to be a mixture. It has to be, I think, well, the most important thing, it has to be owned by the CEO. And unfortunately, they don't, right? They don't, and I suppose, I'll call out my original CEO, like that, started Michael Hill years ago. And, he knew everybody on the team, and he actually used to, you would hear from him on a Friday night or a phone call. They were always speaking to you. We were always at breakfast meetings or dinner meetings. We were, we learnt, and our knowledge and our skills and our stories were handed around and passed around the breakfast table or the lunch table, at meetings and in coffees. And, and I think that's it has to be earned by the executives. And unfortunately, there's a lot of these days, there's a lot of execs, they'll put their weight behind a program, but they'll pass it off, and then it just gets lost, and then they'll start something fresh.
Do you think, picking up on that, Brett, I think it's my experience. So like Sean, I run, 12 to 18 months leadership programs. And one of the things, and it's just music to my ears to hear what you're saying, any tips or tricks that you have, because I think you're saying, I totally agree, it needs to be owned by the CEO, but it actually needs to be owned, lived and breathed and supported, actively supported in the workplace by every single member in the senior exec. My experience is their ego, their fear, they feel threatened. They see the young people learning. I actually got removed from a job I'd finished working with the future leaders, and the existing leaders refused to work with me because they said, we don't want to work with you. You were far too challenging. Now we have to deal with people that are, future leaders who are challenging us. We weren't really up for that. I don't know that that's what we wanted. That whole fear and ego, and it's a huge issue at the top, because they like the status quo. How did you overcome that? Do you have any tips, tricks?
Look, and I've mentioned this to Catherine before. I'm sure I've said it before, right? But if a CEO or an executive or a leader in an organization doesn't have the thought process that their job, their sole function is to make themselves redundant, then they shouldn't be in the role, right? And I'm proud to say that I've just transitioned out of my role, and I'm proud that 2 people that I brought in the organization 10 years ago succeeded me and took over my role, and they'll do better than me. That's our whole existence. That's why we exist, right? So that has to be the first thought. And that's essentially it. It's
so basically it has to be driven by the CEO.
Look, it has to be driven by them. Now, sure, they need to overview and check in up on it, but it also has to, it has to be owned by the CEO, has to be driven by the participant, right? They need to have their development plan, and they've got to drive it. Now, you can't do everything for the future leader and pull them through the program. They've certainly got to drive it and action all of the development things, but it certainly has to be owned on. And look, really, if it's a public organization like ours, it certainly should be in board reports and reported to at board meetings on a regular basis as to, who are the successes, where do they sit, how are they tracking, what are the measurements, and if the board's not over that, or asking the CEO or the executives for the succession plans of their departments, then I think there's a mismatch. And I speak to executives now, all the time in the role now, and there's people that up there that they don't have succession plans. They don't have plans for their people. They either we're too busy or we don't have that, and it has to be number one on their business plan.
Brett, something you said earlier kind of caught my attention. You mentioned, if an organization has good internal processes, it helps people flourish. And I think I've seen a number of organizations that are very process-driven, almost too process-driven. They kind of left the people side of it out. And then there are some organizations that are probably a bit too fluid. They don't really have a process at all. They kind of leave it up to chance or kind of the back of the envelope type of planning. In your experience, as you were working through your programs internally and thinking about things like not just development, but succession planning, How did you straddle that line between process and that people focus?
I suppose in retail, and especially in jewelry, we often talk about the art and the science. And anything I did, I always tried to have a mixture of both. You know, there is the science of the task, or take for instance selling or training or whatever it may be. There's a science and a structured environment of how it should work, but it's really actually the art form of the people that actually bring it to life in their own way, right? And I think the beauty of working with diverse people is allowing them actually to not be too structured, but to bring it to life themselves, bring their personality, and also on how they learn. Everybody learns at different rates, at different speeds, by different methods. And I think you should have a method where you can set it in place. It can be measured. It can be woven in, and they have a plan. But how they choose to do that should be under their own guidance. And Catherine sort of mentioned it too, right? As which we hadn't done, or we had done slightly, but allow them to actually write the program under the structure guidelines, but give them the pool of money and say, okay, if this program is going to cost $5,000 over the next 2 years in travel or time or resources, how best would you spend it so that we actually come out with the right outcome at the end? And allow them to have ownership of their program. And I tell you, it would be, I can guarantee that would be far more successful than what they're currently doing.
Brett, I'm really glad you picked up and taken on this cause, right? Because I think it is a cause. We've got so many organizations that can ruin people's careers, right? Like we get them sort of up and out, and they're not ready, and then they get derailed, and it's a blow to them to be exited out of an organization, and for a lot of cases, not even any fault of their own, and I think in a lot of cases, and I wonder if this is your same experiences, oftentimes people get promoted because they're good at what they do, right? But we don't recognize the fact that the skills that got you here are not necessarily the ones that are going to get you to where you need to be. But hey, Herb in accounting is doing really great, so let's make him the president. And so I'm curious, from your experience, are there any signs of readiness or things that leaders can start looking for in people to say, yeah, this person is actually already demonstrating some stuff that we should be paying attention? Have you come across that, or things that you can share?
Yeah, look, and I think that's, I suppose when Mandy sort of said about the fear of leaders, about people taking over, I think it's also maybe some of them actually don't understand, or the challenge is saying no to someone that believes that they're ready, right? So if you don't have the right metrics, so normally the only metrics that, and I look at the middle management level, say the only metrics I say, oh well, I'm the best salesperson, or I'm getting the best result, so I should step up and I should take the next leadership role. And usually because of performance metrics, the CEO or the executive is afraid to say no to their supposedly best talent, so they just go with it and promote them because they think, well, I'll lose them if they don't, knowing full well that they're promoting the wrong person because that person, whilst good at that role, they know will fail at the next role, the Peter principle, right? I think, again, the external forces should be coaching the leaders or the CEOs about identifying and putting people in the right place. And I learned this over the number of years, as we didn't have a head office when I started to grow here. And over the last 5 years, I was in the position, 6 years, we built a head office team or a support center. And I don't like the word head office. I think all head offices should change their name to support center, because the staff that work there are supporting the frontline workers. But anyway, it's another discussion. So we had the support center, and we filled it with departments. So we had, IT and HR, training, new stores, audit. Well, we had recruitment, and out of the 16 people that we ended up in support center in the various departments other than retail, we actually ended up having 6 retail managers working those departments. So we pulled managers who thought they were the best managers, or they were doing very well in their role at the time, but were probably never going to advance to future leaders in that space. We actually pulled them out of that space, put them into recruitment, one went to IT, one into HR, into audit, into recruitment, and they then trained the future managers because they were good managers, but they were also in a junior department in. So instead of losing them from the organization, or instead of them going, well, I should be the regional, and if you're not going to promote me, I'm going to go and work for somebody else, and we lose them, we actually developed them into a whole different career structure, into the support center team, and then they were also responsible at developing the future managers coming through. And that was probably one of our greatest single successes. And we retained that talent, the knowledge and the skills inside the organization, and then they spread it back out. And I think that really gave us like the fantastic base. So if you can, and it's difficult, right? It's difficult to have those discussions to squash the dreams of someone that wants to head in this direction. But if you're capable or able to give them a new path or a new career path, there's actually probably even more so exciting and better for them, in the long run. That really is a success. And it's not difficult, but it's something that I think all executive teams sort of should look at. Cross-pollination, or moving their people beneath. I was lucky because I was the only one here that I could do it, but I know how hard it would be working in a head office and all the executives fighting each other and not sharing their resources. I could share my own resources around for the better, but I know it would be challenging. But again, the CEO has to own that, and someone's got to step in and start to say, hey, we've got lots of talent throughout the organization. Where best are they utilized, and how can we transfer those skills right throughout the organization?
Well, and that goes back to one of your early data points around people are looking for career development more than they're looking for salary, right? They're looking, even just to, if your culture can cultivate sort of an open-mindedness, that career development might not look like what you expected it to look like, but you could be developing in far greater ways than you're setting up. Like, wow, that's just an incredible opportunity. And you're keeping the knowledge legacy within the organization too, and cross-pollinating. I think that's really cool. In the interest of time, I wanted to ask you one last question, Brett. I know now you've, as you alluded to, you left Michael Hill in the last year and a half or so, and you're now a trusted advisor to the New Zealand government, and you are working as a chair in the TEC Canada organization with other CEOs and leaders. I wonder, what's the one thing that you notice that is consistent from your time in retail, but now working with leadership in government, working with leadership across sector? What's the one thing that you really notice as a transferable observation?
I think, unfortunately, sometimes people's failure to ask for help and seek external advice or mentorship or coaching, or having a trusted resource, a trusted confidential resource outside of the organization. And look, I learned that when I arrived in Canada. I turned up with a wife and 2 young kids in tow, and what are we going to do, and how the hell are we going to build this business here? And I was fortunate enough to tap into a local resource, a prominent Canadian businessman, and I cold called him up and said, hey, can I buy you a coffee? And for 13 years now, he's become my greatest friend and advocate and confidant, and I wouldn't be in the position without him. But had I not made that call and had someone to lean on and to speak to and vent to and challenge me, and that was outside of the organization in a confidential environment, I could well have easily, got on the plane and gone back home and failed.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for that. And that's a perfect way for us to close the conversation, because what you just shared is a common thread through all of our conversations about leadership. It goes to so many of our conversations around vulnerability, around connection, around, reaching out, around asking those questions, about learning from others, and taking action. Like you said, I picked up the phone, like, I need some help. Let's see what happens. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And it is because leaders everywhere, whether it's government, retail, or executives everywhere, are humans at their core, right? So we're all struggling with these same human challenges and opportunities. So anyway, thank you for being here today, Brett.
Thank you.
It was such a pleasure to have you. And you brought such a wealth of experience and insight and information. And I know that my colleagues found it very valuable. And for anyone watching today, we hope that you took some little nuggets of insight and perhaps things that make you go, that's really interesting. I want to unpack that more a little bit. And please continue to tune in and watch any of our other Power of Fives. Of course, you can go back into the past and watch them, and certainly into the future, we will be continuing to cultivate these conversations with other guests as we move forward into 2021. So as always, thanks to my Power of Five colleagues, and we wish you all the best. Cheers.
Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you.